Is this fiction? Is this fiction or fact? Is it even possible for this story to be real? And yet it reads like a memoir. Life of Pi by Yann Martel. There's even an author's note in the beginning that introduces us to the characters as though they're real people. Let's read on about this story, about a story within a story that tells another story about a boy who's living a story and hearing other stories and telling stories, and stories go on and on and on like Pi. Hey there, BookTube, welcome back to my channel. Life of Pi is a novel that the Runwright Reads Book Club read for April. And today we're going to talk about what that meant to each one of us. I'm going to tell you what I thought, and in the comments I'll invite you to share what you thought while you read it. Life of Pi is about a fictional novelist who goes to India to write a story about Portugal. Yeah, I know, that's weird. But when he's accepted that his story has no soul, he starts walking around looking for another story to tell. And he eventually meets this old man named Francis who tells him that he has the story of his life to share, but it's not his story to tell. And so he makes an introduction to the real life Pi, who he says lived this story that we're going to read in this book. That is kind of a memoir, but not really. Pi is named Piscine. He's the younger son of a zookeeping family from Pondicherry in India. But when we meet him, he's an adult. He's now living in Canada, and he's studying subjects like zoology and theology, both of which are subjects that bore him, even though he's lived through the adventure that we're about to read on these pages. He tells us that the old man named Francis, who introduced his story to the novelist, is the man who named him and gave him this name because of its French association with water and swimming. It's interesting that when we meet these characters, they're all in some advanced stage of decline. Francis is no longer the swimming champion that we hear that he was. The legend that motivated Pi's parents to having some unrelated male name their child, naming him Piscine of all things. Pi himself, after having lived through this fantastic adventure of sailing the high seas with a tiger for a companion, is now an unenthusiastic student who can't even summon up the joy for learning. The novelist himself, well, he's a failed novelist. After having experienced some kind of literary success at some point, is now trolling the streets of India looking for a story. But in fact, the narrator mentions this smallness for a reason. He talks about the larger-than-life experiences that diminish when they become memories. And on page 12, very early in the novel, he talked about the Pondicherry Zoo that Pi described as having been epic in proportions when it existed, but that had to shrink if it was to occupy a place in his mind. And I guess that is the compromise of life. The compromise of reality and memory. What can you take from the things that you experience, and how does it change when you remember it? Pi explains that his high school biology teacher was an atheist, and this conflict of philosophical thought, I suppose, is what pushed him to compare religions. And there's a big comparison of religion in this book. Pi makes this comparison by exploring all the religions that will have him, having conversations with all the religious teachers who will talk with him. And so while he's a born Hindu, he also joins the Christian and Islam faiths. So when we meet the boyish Pi, in his state of search and acceptance for multiplicity of religions and godly manifestations, it of course contrasts with the conclusion of Pi's story, which offers also a multiplicity of theories, of the same story that are all allegories of each other. So what is the story? I keep talking about it as though you know, and that is an assumption that I make because it was adapted for a very popular movie, and it tells the story of a boy whose family are zookeepers in India, and they eventually leave home to travel to Canada to sell their animals, and on their journey there's a shipwreck, and here's where the story splits into multiple versions. One version is that Pi is the sole human survivor along with this Royal Bengal tiger and several other animals that survive for a short time but eventually are also killed. In another version of the story, there is the tiger and a few other humans who survive for a short time but are also all killed. At the end, there's only the boy and another creature that may or may not be a tiger. In all, however, Pi's on the water for 227 days. 227 might be familiar because 22/7 is the ratio that works out to be Pi, 3.14159265359. So as you probably guessed from the title, the book is about symbols and what they mean. Some of the symbols are obvious, some of them aren't. So while you're reading, you want to think about what else could the author be talking about when he's making this comparison. But back to the story. When we first met Pai's family, they were zookeepers back in India. He said that before that, his father was actually a hotel manager, but eventually he just exchanged human guests for animal guests. Something that reminds us that there's always two versions of the story. Pai's father routinely sacrifices animals for the safety of his children. He puts livestock in the cages of these ferocious beasts so that his children can see these animals being torn apart, can witness the bloodshed, and know to keep themselves away from harm and danger. Eventually, however, they experience some hardship and decide to trade in the life that they know for the unknown, move to Canada with their animals where they can sell it and make enough money to live handsomely while they pursue the immigrant's dream. Isn't that why we all came? But on their way, those dreams die, and the massive hulking ship that left the ports of India arrives in a new world with their son aboard, just a little dinghy, a lifeboat, a raft. And that's literal but also figurative for the dashed dreams that sometimes immigrants experience, where the reality is never as great as what they expect when they're dreaming of the life that they will have when they're still in their home country. And while they're a united family of substance and means and status back in India, only their youngest son survives the journey and arrives here with his sole companion, a Bengal tiger, the royal Bengal tiger, who is the symbol of dominance and boldness. And I suppose that where Pai eventually credits the tiger with having saved his life on the seas, this is where the author wants to make commentary and suggest that the immigrant only survives this new world by being dominant and bold and taking risks and eventually taking his life into his own hands. That's the only way that he can survive. But what of the tiger himself? Pai spends these 227 days with a tiger for a companion. A tiger with a human name, named Richard Parker, who, when I did some research, I found that the historical Richard Parker was an Englishman. He was a sailor. He joined the Navy. He worked in India, among other countries. He was eventually discharged from the Navy for insubordination because he refused to be belittled and perform the tasks that were beneath his rank. Something that reminds me of the immigrant experience, where sometimes people are highly skilled in their home country, but in order to survive in this new country, they have to belittle themselves or allow themselves to be belittled to take jobs that are beneath their status, beneath their qualifications, just because they're not seen with the same kind of status that they had back in their home country. And I appreciate that inclusion in this book. There was much to enjoy about this book. I like the boyish adventure and the hero's quest, the hero going it alone, surviving the odds, braving the seas, and doing what mere mortals probably couldn't do, and coming out victorious at the end. I like that. There were parts in the middle where the prose waned for me. There was description of Pai just living on this boat that waned. It just went on and on and on, like Pi, the recurring decimal that never stops, just kept going. There were points in the story where I felt like I wanted the journey to be over, even more than Pi did, and he was 227 days on the sea. There were also things about this book that made me hungry all the time. Reading about a person starving just made me want to hoard food. But then I'd read a description about something that made me lose my appetite. So this is not a book that lends itself well to reading and eating if you're into that. But in general, I really enjoyed this story. I gave it a 5-star rating because I enjoyed the story on a literal read, but I also really appreciated the allegory and the symbolism that the author was able to achieve by making this comparison of the immigrant's life, the dreams of leaving your home country and going to this new place, and what that reality can mean, and the things that you lose in order to come out victorious at the end, and what victory really does mean at the end. So that was my experience of the book. I didn't talk about everything that I thought while I was reading this. I'm hoping that some of you will weigh in the comments. You'll tell me what your experience, what you liked, what you didn't. Maybe you'll spark another conversation that I didn't start. Let me know how you found it. Whether you read it last month with me or you've read this book before, let me know what you thought about this book, about the immigrant story, about the hero's quest, and how Yann Martel pulled it off in this memoir-like novel about an unbelievable story that makes you believe things about life. Or did you? Did you like it? Did you like it as much as I did? I welcome your rants and your raves in the comments. talk with me, talk with the other people who comment, and let's have a real discussion about Life of Pi by Yann Martel. So thanks for watching this video. Thanks for being here to discuss Life of Pi with the Runwright Reads Book Club. In May, which we're in right now, we'll be reading Vernon Godlittle by D.B.C. Pierre. This was a Man Booker Prize winner for 2003, and I look forward to reading and talking about it with you. I've told you before, you've probably heard me say this 100 times already. I'm doing the Man Booker Prize Challenge, where I'm trying to read more of the prize winners this month than I've ever read before. And so this is another book that I need to read, so I'm hoping that you'll read it along with me in May. I'm going to post a video next week where I'll post some of my preliminary thoughts on this book and invite you to comment, and maybe we'll read it together and discuss it at the end of the month. So more on that coming soon. If you haven't already gotten it, I'll put a link down below where you can pick up a copy of this one. But that's the future. Thanks for being here today. Thanks for watching this video. Leave me a comment down below, so we'll talk down there. And until next time, happy reading. Bye.